And congratulations for having stamina at the end of LastCon. You're all 100% smarter now. All right. So the contents will include one novel topic, and that is how to deceive machine learning. I'm sure that's something that not all of you expected. There will also be a contest, and Mark will be the judge and hand out the $25 Amazon gift certificate that is the prize. So biometrics offers great promise. However, spoofing is still very easy. And if you look at, you recognize Samsung Galaxy S8 that came out earlier this year. Face detection was spoofed. And then a month later, Starbug from the Chaos Computer Club successfully spoofed iris detection. And I predict that Starbug may be one of the first to give an official account of how he spoofs Face ID. And by the way, these slides are up on SlideShare. They're also posted on the LastCon site. If you have any trouble getting them, just let me know. Biometric recognition, you all know what that is. It's the automated recognition of a person based on biometric and behavioral characteristics. So here's a system. For enrollment, there's a live capture. You capture a digital image of a finger, face, voice, whatever, ear print, eye print, lip print, palm print. And then features are extracted. In the case of fingerprints, minutiae are extracted, and then a template is stored. And then to authenticate, a person will come up to a sensor, enter whatever the biometric trait is, and then there's a comparison of the templates. And based on how the system is tuned, you have a match or a no match. So this is a way, it's a proxy of your physical self in the digital world. But what's wrong with this picture? Yes, there's a question.
This is something I don't know. Is it normal practice to do the equivalent of hashing those characteristics so that they can't be used by other people? Not stay in plain.
Right, so the question is it normal practice to hash? And yes, I'll talk about, there are many methods to hash or encrypt or transform what you get so that the template is stored in a safe, unretrievable means, not subject to reverse engineering, and I'll get to that. But the other thing that's wrong with this is, depending on the context, the image is archived. And especially in the mobile use case, Android varies, but iOS is very specific. In the world of iOS, they document this. They say they delete the digital image as soon as they create the template. Because there's really no need to create a store of your digital images. Why? That's just, you create an OPM situation. And the OPM, Office of Personnel Management, in 2015, the breach resulted in 5.6 million fingerprints being stolen. So depending on the context, you really don't want to store the images. So you really have to ask if the images are saved. And why do you have to ask? If you're evaluating a biometrics vendor, some of them got their start in government or military, and they're used to saving the digital images. And then they turn around and they sell that product on the commercial market. So unless you ask, you don't know if the images are being saved. So a bit about terms. I used the word spoofing already, and there's spoofing, anti-spoofing. But in the world of ISO, they're very specific, and they say the word spoofing can apply to many different contexts. It can be misinterpreted. So they use terms, and we'll define them. A presentation attack is where you try to avoid being recognized, or you try to impersonate in a biometrics recognition system. And here you see the real face and some attacks, some presentation attacks. Photo attack, mask attack, replay attack. Replay attack, you can get a second phone, take a picture of yourself, and show that picture to the first phone. And then the second and third rows, that's from computer vision. It's just a way to transform the top row so that a computer can say yes or no, that's the real person or a fake. And the other thing to note about biometric systems, they may not be able to differentiate between an attacker and a non-conformant presentation. What's a non-conformant presentation? David and I know this. We've worked at a place that has, he's still worked, at a place that has fingerprint readers. And if your finger is the least bit damp, it won't read. So, just, okay, try again. So that would be non-conformant. Another non-conformant presentation would be, and this is the case with Face ID, if you have sunglasses that block IR, infrared, then you can't use those with Face ID when you finally get the phone. I haven't gotten the phone. I'm looking forward to getting the iPhone 10. But if you're going to use specialized sunglasses, they may not work. And that would be a non-conformant presentation. So it's close enough to Halloween. We can get a little bit gory. We talked about this earlier. Another way to do a presentation attack is with mutilations. And going from clockwise, from upper left, taking toes and creating fingerprints from the toes. Upper right is just biting off the fingers, the fingerprints. Bottom left is acid burning the finger, and then on the bottom right, stitches on the finger precludes people from properly presenting their fingerprints. So in some cases, people will go to great lengths to prevent or avoid recognition with fingerprint readers. And then we get to the term PAD, Presentation Attack Detection. And this can be done actively or passively. And a lot of time and attention is spent to determine if it's a live person or a fake, say a picture. What's the difference between a picture of a person or a live person? And are they using a 3D mask, for instance? So let's look at vulnerabilities and the classic attack diagram. So this vulnerability fishbone diagram is many years old, but it still persists. I added blockchain at the bottom. But basically, there are 4 categories. There are intrinsic failures, administration failures, especially for enrollment, biometric overtness. Why? Your biological biometrics, they're not secrets. You touch a glass, your face map, that's all over the internet, your voice has been recorded. And then you look at the infrastructure, and there are many vulnerabilities in terms of replay, a Trojan horse, hill climbing. Who knows what hill climbing is? That's an iterative process where you almost do trial and error to get something to work. And in 2012, a lot of hill climbing attacks were presented, so people made it harder to do these hill climbing attacks. In fact, they started even encrypting the scores or outputs from biometric systems to prevent hill climbing attacks. And I'll talk a little bit about blockchain, a lot of biometric blockchain solutions out there, and some of them still have some issues. So this attack diagram, this is from Nalina Rotha. He wrote a landmark paper on biometrics and biometric recognition. And this is not unlike any other system where you'd have attacks to override a signal, modify a probe. But what's really different is the presentation attack. At a sensor, you would use a false finger, a fake voice, etc., and it's easy to modify the decision. But 2 things we'll talk about are intercepting the image at the sensor, especially on an Android use case, and deceiving machine learning. So let's look at this. Who went to Black Hat USA back in 2015? So 2 guys from FireEye, Wei and Zhang, presented a number of ways to defeat biometric recognition systems on Android. And I'll cover 2 of them. In this one, they had malware on the phone, and they were able to intercept fingerprints at the sensor. This has been fixed. What's the best way to fix a vulnerability or a problem? Have it outed at Black Hat. Product managers are back home, and they're reorganizing and making sure that your ticket's issued by the time they get home. The other thing they demonstrated at Black Hat was the attacker can register his or her additional fingerprint or override an existing fingerprint on the phone. So in this case, the user had registered 3 fingers, and the attacker, Wei and Zhang, they were able to register a 4th finger. That's been fixed too. So who's familiar with machine learning, deep neural networks? All right, do you know how to deceive machine learning?
Feed it bad data?
Close, you're warm, you're warm. So I have 2 warm-up slides. This is warm-up slide number 1. 2 warm-up slides before I get to the Reese Witherspoon slide. Now the reason I have warm-up slides is that the Reese Witherspoon slide failed the husband test. I showed my husband Mark. David knows my husband Mark. And Karen, have you met my husband Mark? You haven't met? Oh, so he's a software whisperer. He has built deep neural network systems and models. He's my resident expert. I showed him the Reese Witherspoon slide. He goes, no way. And so I went back and I go, well, I'll give you 2 warm-up slides to get to the Reese Witherspoon slide. So here's warm-up number 1. On the left, and I apologize for the fuzzy image, that's how the researchers did it, is a car. And an adversarial algorithm was used to modify that image on the left to make the image on the right. If you look closely, can you see those little dots? There's little green and red dots. This is the modified picture that a deep neural network identified as a cat. Now to you and I, that looks like another car, but to the deep neural network engine, that looked like a cat. Here's another example. So who knows of this temple, the Meenakshi temple in India? On the left is the unaltered image, and then in the middle here, that's the distortion that was made, and they're just slight perturbations. Distortion is made, and then here it is, the modified picture is on the right. What does it look like to you? The same building, but to the deep neural network, it looked like an ostrich. So now you are sufficiently warmed up with the Reese Witherspoon slide. Okay. And you're perfectly willing. You can stay like my husband in the world of disbelief. He wants to really talk with the researchers. I sent them some email and said, has this been reproduced? I'm still waiting for a response. So anyway, these were researchers at CMU, Carnegie Mellon, and UNC, University of North Carolina. And they set some ground rules. The attacker can't attack a system until it has been trained. You can't poison the system. You can't inject mislabeled data. You can only present a modified picture to the system to defeat it. And so what they did was they started with geek frames, and they printed out the modification and affixed it to the frame. You see the pattern here in the middle picture. And so they were able to make Reese Witherspoon appear as, or be classified as, Russell Crowe by a deep neural network. and the key is they wanted to be able to have someone, I can use my glasses as a facsimile, they wanted to have someone walk through an airport and fool TSA or go through London with all the closed circuit TVs and not be recognized or be recognized as someone else. These are researchers with what? A tiny budget. You can imagine a nation state or someone else with a large budget going to town with this. So attack a mobile device, and Mark, I'll need you to come up to the front of the room. Here's where the contest comes in. Contest with a $25 Amazon gift card. Who studied the OWASP top 10 earlier this week? Did anyone go to the, okay. Did you cover the mobile top 10?
No, ma'am.
Oh, okay, well, or maybe you can extrapolate then, because there's some similarities. M4 and M6 look like they're related somewhat, but M4 is insecure authentication with an N, and M6 is insecure authorization with a Z. Who knows what the difference is between the two of those? Because there is a distinction.
I guess the insecure authentication is just a failure to even authenticate or identify a user. Insecure authorization would be failure, like when someone actually tries to log in, failure to stop them from actually attempting to log in.
Ooh, close, close. You got the N right, but not the Z part, the authorization part. What is authorization? Mark, you're supposed to be conducting this.
Actually, I think didn't somebody here start to raise their hand and then they put it down? Okay.
Maybe when they're out somewhere.
So authorization is about access, right? Like, I know the user is, but what kind of objects is the user allowed to access? And so manipulating that.
Right, or what objects can the user access, or what is the user allowed to do? Good, good. So we have a winner. So someone said that mobile is the new adversarial ingress point. And mobile devices are growing in number. I'm sure that the bad guys have a product roadmap, just like we have product roadmaps, and they're looking at this. They're seeing that by 2021, 600 million mobile devices with biometrics natively supported from the manufacturer, and any number of face, voice, iris, any number of modalities. And then, I don't know if I quite believe this, but this is from Acuity Research. They say that by 2023, biometric authentication will enable $1.37 trillion in payment and non-payment transactions. So if I'm a bad guy, that's a rich target. So let's look at liveness detection. With a live person, the skin and blood absorb light differently than in a dead person. And with liveness detection, you can see that the iris will respond to light. There's heart rate, a pulse. And for liveness detection, you can also ask a user to do something like blink, smile, shake your head, turn it right, turn it left. But there are all these different ways to make sure that it's really a live person presenting their biometric traits. So what's the matter with just blinking?
Could be automated, machine could blink.
Maybe, or they could be wearing a mask. When USAA came out, one of the things you had to do with, this was in early 2015, they came out with biometrics for the mobile app. People were creating the face, they were printing out the face and then putting it in with a cutout eyes and just blinking to defeat the system. So with all the issues around liveness detection, many organizations, I've picked just 3 here, are creating standards for liveness detection. The FIDO Alliance, the first one, Fast Identity Online Alliance, they will have certification for biometrics for finger. It's rumored to come out later this year. ISO has a standard called 30107. That's not a Georgia zip code, that's 30107. And part 4, which is still in draft form, is for mobile devices. And then in Germany, the Federal Office for Information Security has a standard, and Safran Morpho is supposedly the first vendor. I'm not sure if they're the only. Karen might be able to talk about Gemalto, but they've achieved this certification for liveness detection. And I read about this Safran, and I thought, boy, I raced to find out, what have they done? It's brand new, rigorous certification. And all it is turn your head to the right, turn it down, and you see the guy on the left, he's doing the selfie. Well, he's in a very precarious spot. So to turn his head left, right would be dangerous. In fact, where is this guy? Who recognizes where he is? Yes? Brazil. Brazil, what city?
Oh,
Rio de Janeiro, and what statue? Yes, yeah, even our AV guy, Christ the Redeemer, right? Yeah. So he's in no place to do liveness detection. And so I recently evaluated over 50 biometrics vendors, and they were at a loss for liveness detection. And I said, well, you just go to this contest. This was earlier this year was the International Joint Conference on Biometrics, and they feature liveness detection competitions for iris, for finger. I said, go there. There's some researchers with a lot of great ideas. You can pick up on that. And also, in the future, liveness detection will have to account for VR, virtual reality. These are researchers from University of North Carolina. And by the way, I have non-disclosure agreements with some of the biometrics vendors, so I can't reproduce what they have told me, but I can point to academia. That's why a lot of these slides point to what's going on in academia. But with a very little budget, UNC researchers took a face off of Facebook. It took the pictures and they did feature extraction, the key characteristics. They created a 3D model, textured it to look like a face. They added the eyes, the gaze correction. They added expressions. And then they used a VR reality viewing system, and they successfully defeated facial biometric recognition systems. So this is something to look for in the future if you're either shopping for a building or even just using a system, different ways that can be defeated. Tabula Rasa, that's an acronym. This is an organization out of Europe, and they're funded by the EC, the European Commission. It's a conglomerate. Many vendors and organizations from around the world contribute to this. And just look at the red font here. I won't go into all the detail, but they're looking at combining multiple biometric traits. Don't just use face, don't use just iris, use a combination. And they're also looking at novel methods for liveness detection. So these reports will come out in the near future. So we talked about blinking or turning your head right and left. What are some alternatives for liveness detection or presentation attack detection? Well, you can use algorithms in software or hardware. And this is Raghavendra. He does a lot of research with a guy named Christoph Busch, whom David Ochel knows. And so if you teach the computer how to look at these different inputs, it's much better at determining the fake. So on the left is the real image, then the laser printer, inkjet printer, or a replay attack using an iPad. And if you take some algorithms from computer vision, it makes it much easier for the computer to tell the difference between the fake and the real thing. That's local binary patterns. That's just an algorithm from computer vision. So there's some advantages. Again, you can just look at the red font here. You can leverage machine learning much easier if the algorithms are in software. If it's in hardware, it's more expensive. It consumes more power in some cases. And it might be slower. Let's say you're waiting for the multiple heartbeats to ring in. That could account for some latency. So we talked a little about, you talked about template protection, biometric template protection. Why is that necessary? People can steal the templates. And this is one example. This is from work that started back in 2009. And then the paper was published in 2011. So this is nothing new. But researchers took the minutia in the upper left corner and were able, from the minutia, to recreate a fingerprint. And it used to be the case that if you asked someone, starting with just the template, can you reproduce the biometric sample? And it used to be, people said the answer is no. Well, the answer is yes. And I've had this debate with so many, like those 50 vendors, I've had this debate with so many people, I started referencing, and then I'd print this out, and I would cut and paste this and send this in emails. This is the report. This came out in June of this year. And the title is Biometrics in Search of Identity and Security. And the authors are the who's who of the world of biometrics. Mark Nixon, Sébastien Marcel. They come from Canada, Finland, UK, Italy, France, Switzerland. So they made a special point to call this out, that it is possible to reverse engineer the templates. So now all of you will go away and win some contests by having this answer. And so there are different ways to protect templates. Remember you asked about hashing? Well, if there's something called cancelable biometrics, and that uses hashing or salting. Biometric encryption, homomorphic encryption. Who knows what homomorphic encryption is? Karen? Okay, yeah. So, I'm sorry. So that's when you operate on the data that's encrypted, and you get the same answer as if you operated on it in the clear. But everything, all the data stays in the homomorphic or encrypted state.
For certain operation, not all operation.
Right, right. And so there are many ways to do biometric template protection. This is just a sample, and there are vendors looking at employing this or permutations of this right now, and they're not, you need an NDA to discuss exactly what they're trying to build in, but they now recognize that it's possible to reverse engineer the templates, so they're taking action to protect it. I won't go into detail, these are slides for reference, but for cancelable biometrics, you transform the template and then you compare everything in the transform domain. And then with biometric encryption, let's say you have a fingerprint, you take the minutia or some characteristics and then use that for key binding or key generation. And then we just talked about homomorphic encryption, where everything stays encrypted the entire time. And in this example, they even keep the score encrypted. So it's just an example that there are many ways to protect the template. So if you ask a biometrics vendor, are you protecting the templates? And they say no, well, you can point to them, there are many options that they do have. So the biometric templates are evolving. One way to get around this ability to reverse engineer a biometric template is to make it much more complex. So instead of having just one biometric modality in the template, some companies, and I'll name it, there's one company called AimBrain out of the UK, and they're adding biological, behavioral, and device sensor inputs into the template. So instead of doing just a point in time, just a fingerprint or face or voice from the mobile phone and putting that in the template, they're adding dozens and dozens of inputs. They're adding the touch screen, the pressure, everything you do for instance, a banking transaction. How do you type? How do you swipe? How do you hold the phone? They're adding the time, location, and any number of biometrics. And even if you're not using your phone, if it's in your pocket, they're keeping track of how you walk. They're keeping track of your location. So it's very accurate, but what's wrong with this picture? If you're concerned, if you're a privacy person like myself, that's very privacy invasive. So and here we get to biometrics and blockchain. By the way, I'm no advocate of biometrics and blockchain, but it's a big buzzword. There are a lot of small startups that are getting huge amounts of VC funding just to do biometrics and blockchain. And it's biometrics and blockchain, because the blockchain is no place to put any of your identity. If someone says, oh yeah, they're doing a biometric system and they're putting your identity on the blockchain, that's the wrong answer. We'll go into why. So who has heard of blockchain? I'm sure you're all familiar. Okay. Here's one example. Who's heard of ID2020? That's a project, and the problem statement is that there are over 1 billion people that don't have an officially recognizable identity. And so companies like Accenture and Microsoft are donating a lot of their time and money to create this blockchain-based biometric system to give these people, a lot of them are refugees, an identity. And they're using fingerprint and iris first. And on the right-hand side in the purple ink, this is their basic philosophy and strategy for biometrics and blockchain. The identities are decentralized, that's by definition of blockchain, and they're anchored by blockchain IDs. So they do have, the IDs are on the blockchain, and it's linked to zero trust data stores. In other words, the biometrics are stored in a zero trust, hopefully hack-proof environment, and we all know by the end of these last few days, nothing's foolproof like that. But they are calling it zero trust data stores that are universally discoverable. So that's one example. And then this is another example from IBM. It's based on their Hyper Ledger example. And the object store is where they're storing the template data and the image data. So again, if you have, one of the first questions that I asked them, why do you store the image data? And part of the answer is this is for government and homeland security. So if you look at the application for this, you can see it's Department of Homeland Security, TSA, Interpol, and what their goal is interoperability of biometrics. They all want to be able to access or share the biometrics. Now, there are some concerns. Did anyone learn about any of the vulnerabilities on the blockchain last few days? Well, here's some. How is the cryptography handled? Is it open source and peer reviewed? What do you do if you've lost the private keys? What do you do if the keys are stolen? Private blockchains might not really be as publicly decentralized as cryptocurrency implementations that are out there. There might be single points of failure subject to DDoS. There's a super user somewhere. That's the whole thing with blockchain. People say blockchain is the best thing to slice bread, right? Well, somewhere there's a super user with admin rights that can change anything on the system, right? It's really just another piece of software. And then you might have some load or performance issues at large scale. And some people might say that, well, we've gone from databases to blockchain mines. Have we really created anything that's more secure? And if you're still storing the biometric images, especially in the Clare, then there's arguably no advancement. So the other thing is there are numerous blockchain implementations out there. One of the earlier, the ID20 implementation was Ethereum. And many experts claim it's difficult to construct a threat model on which to perform a risk assessment. I've asked some people for their threat model for blockchain, and they haven't supplied any. And they say, in this world, blockchain, it's complex, it's emerging still, it's still new technology, maybe poorly understood. So here's from Dilbert, and the boss comes up to Dilbert and goes, I think we should build a blockchain. And Dilbert goes, uh-oh. And he's thinking, does he understand what he said? Or is it something he saw in a trade magazine? And so he goes to his boss, what color do you want that blockchain? He goes, I think mauve has the most RAM. So just a bit of levity with all this seriousness. So what's going to happen in the future? First, risk, and Karen talked about risk earlier. Risk will become more important because there are trade-offs. If you're doing all of this risk mitigation, it can affect the user experience, the cost, the performance. And so if you have a low-risk application, maybe you don't go as far as if you have a high-risk application that needs more mitigation and more liveness detection and presentation attack detection. This is from China, Kentucky Fried Chicken in China. And this woman, there's a video online, and I have references on all the slides, the bottom left-hand corner. She's in China, and she goes to Kentucky Fried Chicken to order dinner. She goes up to the kiosk, touch screen, orders dinner, and there's a 3D camera, and she enters her phone number and walks away. That's a transaction. In the future, she'll just smile and pay. That's why it's called smile to pay. And then who's ready for, this is gets to brain prints and using your mind as a biometric mode for authentication. Who reads ACM Magazine? ACM is to software what IEEE is to hardware. And the authors are saying that law enforcement may in the future ask to read your mind, and they contend that that gadget that you have that's in your hand all the time, it's really a prosthetic part of your mind which just so happens to make phone calls. And they also warn what part of your thoughts you have to shield or protect against surveillance or inspection or detection of any kind. So there is some research going on in this area. The National Science Foundation recently awarded over $1 million, and they want to know what are the vulnerabilities, what are the strengths and weaknesses of brain biometrics. Look forward to seeing that. Was just in November that was awarded. And time for gratitude. Without these people doing research and being pioneers in the field, we wouldn't be where we are today. This is Anil Jain. He wrote the book on biometrics. Sébastien Marcel, he's doing research in PAD algorithms. Nalina Rotha with that original attack diagram. And Christoph Busch, who does research in both Norway and Germany. And with that, any questions? Yes. If you have a microphone.
I'm imagining biometric creep. You age, your hair grows, your skin sags, you might get a sunburn or something.
Right.
Is anyone considering adaptively storing that information so that, say they don't have the image from a year ago, but they actually adapt as you change slowly?
Yes, there are two parts to that. So the question is about you age, especially with face. Finger doesn't change as rapidly, but face does. Anil Jain says that facial biometrics have a timestamp. They should be updated at least once every 3 or 4 years. And then with Face ID, I don't have all the research, but there are implications and inferences that they continually update the template. So the machine learning knows, well, hey, if you had a big full beard that hid a lot of the face math for the lower face, that they would update the template that would evolve over time. But yeah, that's another challenge with biometrics. And if you have a cut on your finger or your voice changes with a cold, they're all subject to change. And that's why more and more people are saying too, don't rely on just one biometric modality, use a combination. Good question. Chris.
That's why, for instance, brainwave biometrics, a person can change markedly if they have prescription done.
Right.
I just got to listen to a whole presentation on the effects of like crossing magnesium, potassium, increases in all those, or calcium, and they can significantly alter your brain waves.
Right.
In a way that you can fill the biometrics with complete. So I guess what you would have failure modes. First, I assume they do that. Well, we just tried that. Let's try another form of identification. So you're obviously a dominion fine today. So what you see will be a lower grade biometric until finally they'll establish your identity or reject it. Because you can see somebody in a duress, and maybe they have to increase. Imagine they'll get the idea. So I was just wondering if they thought about that in that field so far.
The brain biometrics is still fairly new. It's still in a lot of research, although as far back as 2013, people were using brain waves as a form of biometric recognition. I talked with a gentleman who spoke earlier, and he's doing research. He takes glasses, and he has 2 sensors on either side for a total of 4. So 4 sensors to connect to the brain, and he's doing physiological, physical, and chemical detection. But you're right. The thing with we're all human beings. We change, we evolve. So, and then you get back to the AIM brain example, where they include your location, your device type, and then it gets more complicated. But relying on one modality is really becoming insecure.
Yeah, it's soldiers in the field with hand-printed guns and things like that. Yeah, you have to really think about those. So you don't want the enemy grabbing it, but you want them to be able to use the weapon.
Right.
Maybe those you perhaps want to deny access to the weapon if the mental state falls out of a known profile. And that's what that other guy would be able to do at some point. But he has to merge with brain scanning, the techno-maladies and abnormalities. So if a person decides to turn the weapon on his team, it would be possible to detect that that person is actually falling under a mental aberration pattern.
Oh, fascinating.
Think about. And then the gun will deny it. And that information is available, but the neural scanning has not merged in with it. So I was trying to see if those technologies can cross yet. So just think about like what an autistic brain looks like, a schizophrenic brain, a psychotic brain, those kinds of things. And when you try to match them with somebody who's being trusted under extreme duress to have fully functional element would you continue to grant them access to under the higher circumstance. So it's just things that they do are crossing the different.
Right, and the part about under duress, there are a lot of, you can add the heart rate and perspiration. There are other things out of Israel, El Al Airlines, they were experimenting with different ways to get biological readings on the person just to detect if they were a terrorist.
That's actually an extreme art, and that's why the El Al Airport has such extremely long corridors. That's also how they train their people, is that they practice on them. So they try different languages and expressions. There's still a lot of different factors. My partner actually thoroughly understands and apparently had a chance to work with them, or at least have it thoroughly explained. So for instance, they'll say a phrase be in French that's totally obscene. They see what the person does because they don't match the profile of somebody that is native. And if they're obscene, they would probably react in a certain way.
Right, or at least, and then you get back to the brainwaves would show cognition that they understood to a bête comme mes pieds, which means you were stupid like my feet. But if I heard that, it would register somehow in my mind because I understand French that way. So yeah.
T'es comme mes pieds. So you do addition, and you can tell whether or not they're fluent.
Right.
So you say in Hebrew, Arabic, maybe rock doll. You would have one of the agents drop by and show a body part, and just say most people won't react to the same one as people that are more tribal. So eventually you'll have them tagged, and then you'll experiment with full-on for interrogation. But that's why they have one corridor so they can actually come out. There's multiple places. But that's one of the things, that's why this closely connects with the biometrics. Because you're looking at the external factors, but now you can look at them more internally. But you want to limit what you can do with that information. Otherwise, what we do have the police put a thing on your head and say, oh, no, he's psychotic today, follow me.
Well, yeah, I don't want the chip either.
Yeah.
Although yeah.
He's psychotic, let's chip him. All right, so thank you.
I think that's all. Is it actually working?
Yes, I think so.
No.
Okay, it is working. So, I mean, this stuff really scares me actually, because from a data privacy point of view, it's way too much information about any person, in my view. And I imagine that there are people, as this develops on the other side, there are folks who would be developing cloaking mechanisms. Like, how do you stop systems from getting information about you? And does it mean like, oh, he's sneering instead of smiling at the smile and pay?
Aluminum foil.
You know, or
Or the glasses that make Reese Witherspoon look like Russell Crowe.
glasses,
Right.
or
Right.
you know, because I mean, I'm pretty uncomfortable with the level of data that's already out there about me and my family. I mean, God, how much more do we need?
And so it's a person who has a privacy certification, CIPP/E, and studying the GDPR. Your biometrics are classified as sensitive data under the GDPR, and you need to get consent before you collect and process that data. So I think you'll see some backlash, and with that backlash, more people demanding that if your biometrics are being collected, that you have to give consent, or that you control that. There's something called UMA, user managed access, where you control all of your authentication and identity attributes. But the horse has left the barn in terms of collecting our data, and then even under GDPR, there are exceptions to getting permission, and if it's for homeland security, prevent terrorism, they have all a list of exceptions, they can still collect your data. But I think there's going to be a run on special glasses or something to make cloaking easy. That'd be a great startup idea.
As well as helping GDPR being implemented for small companies.
Right.
Because that's impossible. I don't think they need to like Russell Crowe.
Yeah. This question?
So I was curious, if you have a large organization that implements a specific solution with biometrics, and later on they find that there's some significant vulnerability, like it's fooled by photographs, for example, how should the organization handle that kind of situation? I mean, we have something similar with Social Security numbers now, where everyone's social security is now kind of out there. I'm just kind of curious how the organization would pivot in that situation.
So let's say it's a large organization, and you're talking about employees or customers?
Either.
Either one. So they have an issue with that. First, they should notify, notification if it's the customers, they should tell them what happened. And if it's employees, maybe they can do an internal memo or an email. And then they have to remedy the system. But once your biometrics are out there, they can't be reset. It's game over. But at least they can notify the people. And you saw what happened with the OPM breach. 5.6 million fingerprints, along with all the security clearance information, was stolen and is out in the wild. And so the other thing that you can do is, if you're a company and you're setting up the biometrics in the first place, you can take measure to address all these vulnerabilities. But it's game over once they're out. Unless you're going to stitch your fingers like that one picture, yeah.
It's very Halloween. That's why it's very Halloween.
So I kind of feel like we haven't really hit on it that much, except for you pointed it out during your talk. There's always a super user, right? To me, that's the most important point you made in all of this, that there's always somebody who has all the privileges.
Yes.
And kind of to that same point, security, the user is really the most vulnerable part of a security system. So it seems like rather than spoofing the system, and I'm sure there will be more complicated spoofs and more complicated detections and all of that,
right.
But social engineering, instead of, you don't need to spoof the system to think you're the guy who has access to the building you want to get into. You just need to get the guy who has access to let you into the building, because he's already got it, right? So no matter how complicated the detection gets, there's still social engineering.
Right, and you've probably been to DEF CON and gone to the social engineering village, where you see how easy it is. As soon as there's a human element for spoofing, game over there too. And so, so if you work in an environment where there are fingerprint readers, usually there's the person, the super user, the admin person, and then there might be 5 to 10 other people that have access to that system. Let's say that your fingerprint reader isn't working and you want to reset your fingerprints and issue a new template. That person, there might be multiple other people that have access. So it's not even just the super user. There might be a number of people that have access, and they can then update that. And then who has, where are the, if there's a central database, where is that stored? The point is well taken that you just have to get to the super user for the blockchain, the biometric system, and that might be a much easier hack, if you will. Good point.
Well, what about separation of duties and constant logging, for review? That's how you solve that problem. It's the only thing we got.
Right. If there are separation, and if you're, depending on how large the organization is, if there's an organization maybe of just 200 people and they're using biometric finger sensors at every door, there might be maybe one person's in charge of that, and there might be 3 to 5 other office people that have access to the machine to update fingerprints, or enroll a new person. So it just, if it's a small person, who says that? Well, but if it's a larger company, I could see where the separation of duties definitely should be there.
Yeah.
That's a good suggestion. Yeah, very good. All right, time for one more.
All right.
Let's say it's over at the end. Thank you very much.